Hey everyone, welcome to another round of dialogues and debates. I'm your host, Xavier Harding, and this time around, we are talking about mental health, specifically how mental health apps may be taking advantage of your personal data. That was the theme of our most recent Privacy Not Included guide, straight out of Mozilla Foundation. Here with me today are two folks who put together the guide and one very special guest here to talk about everything you need to know regarding mental health apps and your privacy. Here with me today are Jen Caltrider. Jen is the lead on Privacy Not Included, 6 years running now, actually, which is a pretty awesome accomplishment. Misha Rykov. Misha is a researcher on Privacy Not Included. And we've got Bridget Todd. Bridget Todd is a podcast host, podcast producer. She's the creator of There Are No Girls on the Internet. And she also works at iHeart Radio. Today, we're talking about mental health. How's everyone doing today?
Man.
Yeah, that sounds about accurate.
Yeah, it's been a ride. Let's just say, yeah, that's how I'm doing. I hope everybody else is doing well. But yeah,
I hope so too, Misha. Bridget,
I echo Jen. Perhaps emotionally drained, mad, overwhelmed, perhaps.
Yeah, it feels like the hits keep on coming. Like it feels like one after the other, which I guess is a good thing that we're talking today about mental health, because I think right now, in so many ways, like we're seeing the importance of prioritizing our mental health. But unfortunately, we're seeing that there are a lot of companies who, is it harsh to say want to take advantage of that? Maybe we could start with Jen. So I know, you put together this guide. What was actually your thinking behind focusing on mental health apps for this Privacy Not Included guide?
It started with a conversation with Misha, a conversation that Misha and I had back in at the beginning of the year. I would offer a more concise date, but everything's a blur. And Misha and I were just talking, and it's just been such a crazy time, right? The pandemic. Misha, my partner and friend, is Ukrainian, and his country's in a war now, and here in the U.S. we've got racism and sexism and school shootings, and everybody's just struggling right now. And we saw this at the start of the pandemic with video call apps that we reviewed earlier. When the pandemic hit, everybody went online to talk to people, and these video call apps exploded, and there was a lot of money to be made there, and kind of the desire for growth and money kind of outpaced some of the privacy and security concerns. And then, slowly, I think those have been catching up a little bit. But we've seen this with mental health too, because there's a mental health crisis around the world. And of course, tech was like, oh, we can make money on this. And so you see thousands, tens of thousands of mental health apps kind of popping up recently. And that's good. I mean, they offer some good things for people. They offer access to therapy for people that might not be able to access it otherwise because of, resources or, availability. They offer, bots that people can chat to that they feel more comfortable chatting to than a human. They offer some things, but in the rush to growth, the rush to make money, they've kind of just embraced the data economy wholeheartedly, it seems. And, Misha and I saw in privacy policies, just things that were very concerning. It's one thing it's one thing for my drumming app to collect a lot of information on me. It's another thing for my mental health app that collects way more personal information, way more sensitive information, and then turns around and finds a way to make money off that. And that just felt really creepy. And so that's kind of how it started. And then we started doing the research, and Misha and I have joked all along that researching mental health apps is bad for your mental health.
It sounds like it would be. So let's talk specifics. Maybe Misha can lead here, and maybe Jen can chime in. So when you did the research, let's name names. Who were the apps, and what were they collecting?
So we look at 32 mental health and prayer apps, 5 prayer apps, and 27 mental health apps. And initially, when we published 1 month ago, only 3 apps we reviewed did not earn our ding. So we said that they're okay, and these were Headspace, Wiser, and the PTSD coach made by the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs.
So those were the good ones.
Yes, these were, so 2 of them we said are good. They get our best of designation, and one was okayish. It was Headspace. And then 29 apps were not okay. Yeah, so we just don't recommend them from the point of view of privacy and security. But in the last 1 month, we did a bit of back and forth with some apps. They tried their best to, or at least they said that they tried their best to meet these requirements that they have, and we removed, I think, four more things. So now we say that out of these 32 that we looked at, just 7 are okay, and 25 are not.
Got it. So I want to bring in Bridget into this conversation. When you hear that, what goes through your mind?
I think it's really a lot of what Jen said, that I think that tech platforms like the ones that they looked at in this report, they recognize that there's money to be made, and that comes at the expense of us, the people who use them. I think the fact that so many of them were just not good, only 7 were okay, I think really says something about the role that these apps play in our collective consciousnesses, the way that they show up in our lives, and how they really are, a lot of times just ways to make money from us, our experiences, and our data and like private information. And it makes me really sad, because I think, just as Jen said, I think that a lot of these apps are really profiting off of this weird space where, of course, therapy and mental health services should be accessible, right? You should be able to have access to it, and it should be easy to find. But that doesn't mean that we should just accept, apps that are going to be sketchy as it pertains to our privacy and our data. And so I think it really is a shame that these companies have been able to occupy this thing that is both a clear need, but not serving the people that they say that they're serving in a way that's going to actually be meaningful.
For sure. And I want to also bring in to the conversation an episode you had recently on your There Are No Girls on the Internet podcast. So we were actually going to have this conversation last week, but we postponed it because we wanted to not take away attention from the Uvalde shooting. And there's also the Buffalo grocery store shooting. And there's just so much going on in the world right now. I can't keep up. But in the podcast that you run, you touched on another tragedy from last year, November. Travis Scott at his concert at Astroworld, people died. I think there were 10 deaths and hundreds injured. And there was a response to that tragedy that Travis Scott's team had. Can you talk about the response that the team had and why some saw it as reductive?
Yeah, so I covered this pretty extensively on my podcast, There Are No Girls on the Internet, in the wake of that horrible tragedy where a lot of the people who lost their lives were young people, very young people, because he has a fan base that is very young. In the wake of that, he offered, I think it was 3 free months of access to BetterHelp. And, if you talk to a therapist, they would say like, oh, if you were in a true tragedy like Astroworld, you would need much more than 3 free months of some, possibly janky mental health app service, right? And so even just the way that it was rolled out, I felt was a little bit, didn't sit right with me. And then also, I think the way that Travis Scott talked about partnering with a service like BetterHelp as a kind of, it just felt very like a PR move to be like, oh, well, I'm taking ownership of what happened here because I'm doing this partnership with BetterHelp. That means that it's all good. And, we know that BetterHelp doesn't have the best policies when it comes to privacy and data. And so for me, it just really looked like these young people who were already exploited by, buying tickets to this concert that ended up being unsafe and ended up, really endangering their lives. That the sort of consolation for that would be, oh, and now we're going to serve up your data and privacy to be mined by BetterHelp. It just really didn't sit right with me.
Yeah, Jen and Misha, what do you think about that? Maybe we start with Jen. I'm sure you have thoughts.
I have thoughts. My dog also might weigh in with some thoughts right now. She's barking. Apologies for that, but
Can you put the camera on the dog, please? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I could, but she's she's cuter than I am by far. It's totally crass how this tragedy was seen as a PR opportunity for this company to make money, and and it's just, and Bridget was mentioning 3 months. I read 1 month of and 1 month isn't even.
Well, it might have been 1 month.
Barely enough time. Yeah, it wasn't even enough time to find a therapist. So it's like, holy cow, and you just see this, anybody who's listened to a podcast or watched TV, like their ads are everywhere. They're pouring, a lot of these companies are pouring millions and millions of dollars into growing their base right now because they're getting tons of investment money, tons of, startup investment money to grow really quickly right now. And so you're seeing these ads where you're seeing, celebrity influencers that are spokespeople for these apps, which again, these apps aren't, the idea behind the app is good, giving people better access to mental health help. The problem is when people's privacy isn't respected, because you're giving up some of your most personal information to these apps, and sensitive information, and things that could really harm you if they're leaked or stolen or not protected well. And so that's our concern. We're not saying these apps shouldn't exist. We're saying if there's a space where privacy and security should be held to a way higher standard than what we hold for the drumming app or the recipe app that we use every day. It's mental health apps, and they're not right now. And Misha can tell you, how many of the past, just like the weak passwords when he was reviewing the apps, he can talk about, he was able to log into one app with a password of 111. And and it's just like, if they're taking, like, if their security is that lax, and I had some conversations with a company that was unhappy with the way we reviewed them, and we email each company 3 times before we launched, with a list of questions, contacting them, letting them know we're doing the research, letting them know when we're launching, giving them ample opportunity to respond to us. And of the 31 companies that we emailed, only 3 got back to us before we launched. And then Misha emails the email address listed in the privacy policy for questions about privacy questions. And one company was really unhappy with our review and was very angry and threatening, and I met with them, and they're like, why didn't you reach out to us? And like, we did 3 times in the email in your privacy policy. And their response was, oh, the person that was monitoring that left in March and we haven't replaced them. And so when you read that this company says that they care a lot about your privacy and security, and they say that all the time, they say it in their privacy policy, they say that publicly, but they don't have somebody monitoring the email that is responsible, not just for privacy questions, but also if you want to get your data deleted or things like that. It just kind of goes to show that they're caring more about growth. They're caring more about gaining subscribers and showing growth to their investors than they are about actually protecting your privacy and security. And it's just not how it should be. They need to be better.
I'm still stuck on the app that let Misha log in with the password being a single one, like the number 1 login. If you're a developer out there, just go back to the drawing board. If you, Jen and Misha, for anybody on the panel, why should I care? I think there are a lot of people out there who are like, well, my data's out there anyway. It's too much energy and thought process for me to have to like worry about who has my data. Everyone has everything anyway. Why should I care?
I'll let somebody else start.
Yeah,
answering.
I know Jen has thoughts.
Yeah, I'll let somebody else start. Yeah,
I can start. It's a huge question, and I think all of us has reason to care, and all of us has different reasons to care depending on our backgrounds and identity and the place we live at. But if you look from like general perspective of someone who lives in the Western world, let's say in the US or here where I'm based in Europe, everyone should care, at least from the perspective of the social good, because if everyone gives away their data without questioning where it goes and without putting in place any mechanics of finding out where this data goes, then as we see from the history of last 10 years, this data is misused by someone, and it is sold and it is used for advertisement in the ways that is hardly ethical and which we can see is bad for the public good. Yeah, it is used to create like racial profiling. It ends up in the hands of people who suppress freedom of speech. It ends up in the hands of someone who wants to make money out of it, who wants to take advantage of the vulnerable people. In this case, maybe people who have mental, like who really feel bad right now, or who have suicidal thoughts, and so on. Yeah, like anyone can think of the way how their rights or their particular position and the position of their community can be put in danger with this huge machine of data brokers and data sharing without transparency in it. Yeah, but so my perspective of being in Germany is that here people care more about data privacy, and there are institutions in place, and there are regulations called GDPR that provide everyone the rights. But even with all of those things, we see that there are still a lot of data leaks. There are still manipulations of elections, but there are less than, let's say, somewhere else. So it's important to start this like voyage to increase security and privacy as soon as possible, because even with these mechanics in place, there are still a lot of ways to misuse data.
Now I think about it, I think I want to kind of do a round table and a round robin with this question. So I think maybe we'll go Bridget next and then Jen to finish off. So Bridget, I don't care. Who cares who has my data? Everyone has everything anyway. It's not costing me money. What do I care?
Yeah, I love this question. I think it really goes back to something that Jen started when we opened the panel. It's this idea of, I think it's one thing for like your drumming app or your recipe app to have information about you. But when we're talking about a mental health app, think about all of the things that you would say to a mental health counselor that you would not be comfortable, being sold, right? And so I think anybody should care, because it's really a time where we need to ask a fundamental question. Is everything for sale? Is everything about you for sale? Is everything about you like, are we comfortable with the relationship of mental health apps who promise that they're going to like give you mental health services and help you through the hardest traumatic times of your life, turning around and using that data to make money for profit? And so I think it's anybody should care, because it really gives an opportunity to ask that question, like, should everything be for sale? If I went to a medical professional and I told them all the different things that were happening with my body and they turned around and sold that, you would probably be horrified, right? And so I think it's really about asking the question of, is this the future that we want, right? And just really understanding, the dynamic that sets up when we're just okay with like, okay, yeah, my mental health information is just going to be, another data point that somebody could profit off of, from my experience.
The imagery of like you telling your doctor what's wrong with you, and then him turning around and like selling that data is just gross. But I guess with these apps, you don't see that transaction. You just kind of just use the app. Jen, your question of this is going to be a kind of a slightly harder version of this question, where what if a person is saying the need for mental health services right now outweighs my worry with having my data being handed over. In that scenario, like, what do you think about that? Does the person not use BetterHelp even though they're scummy, or do they just go ahead and use it? And like, what do you think about those kinds of scenarios?
Everybody has to weigh the risks versus, what's going on with them. And I don't want to tell people not to use the apps if they're suffering from mental health. What I want to do is twofold. I want to tell the companies, do better. Like, seriously, like, do better. You guys suck. Do better. And I want to tell people, get the help you need. If you have the mental, ability to kind of do some research and find some of the apps that are better than others, and hopefully our guide can help with that. please do that. And I just want to share a little anecdote from this past month of the kind of the level of data collection that these apps do is beyond anything else really that we review. I mean, and there was one app that didn't like our review and started yelling at me over email. It's fun to get yelled at over email about their concerns with it, and it was a company that hadn't gotten back to us. And I was like, look, I'm happy to address your concerns. Here are the questions that we have. If you can clear this up, that would be great. And they were demanding that we take the review down, although they wouldn't tell me what was wrong with the review. And at one point, they sent me an email, and when I said it's not our policy to take down reviews, I'm happy to update things if there's something that we got wrong and you can show us what's wrong. But they never did that. All they did was they threatened me. And the threat was, we're hearing from a lot of our members that they're concerned about the privacy based on your review, and these members are very vulnerable mentally. And if any of our members commit self-harm because of your review, that's on you. And that was amazing to me, because Misha and I just reviewed their publicly stated policies of how they handled things. Like we aren't responsible for, and they said in their email, our members share very sensitive triggers and very sensitive information with us. And they're really worried that we're not going to keep it private. And so and these people can be easily set off to self-harm. And I was like, that sounds like a really big responsibility that you guys have in the app that you've created. And please take better care of your members and do better for the privacy of your members. So the fact that this company was admitting that they collected really super sensitive information on their members, that if it leaked could result in members committing self-harm, shows that the level of this information that they're collecting, and then not taking responsibility for making sure that they're absolutely doing everything they can to protect the privacy of those members, to the point where they were trying to blame me if any of their members self-harmed. And that was a bad day for me, because I take self-harm really seriously, and I was like, all we did was look at your publicly stated policies and try and report what it says. Like, you guys wrote that, you guys own that. But it just goes to show that there's a lot of sensitive information, and okay, maybe that's a level that most people are. Oh, I'm just going to track my moods, or make a list of some symptoms that I have. But if that data is collected and then a company doesn't handle it well, and it's either leaked or stolen or sold, and your insurance company gets a hold of it and your insurance premiums go up, or a future employer finds out about it and says, oh, between the two candidates, you were really great, but we found out that you use this mental health app 5 times a week, so we're a little worried about you. So there's repercussions for this stuff that you might not even say. And again, once you put something on the internet, it's there forever and you can't get it back. And so putting this stuff out there, a lot of these apps target young people, and they're putting stuff out there because they need help. They're struggling mentally. They might not be able to get that back. So having these protections, that their data is going to be protected, that's going to be deleted, they can ask for it to be deleted, these sorts of things is just so important when it comes to a space where this data can be used against you. This data can be used to manipulate you. And it's just the companies really do need to do better.
Yeah, the grand irony in all this is that these companies are mental health companies. Like the manipulation, the using data against people. These are the companies that you're supposed to think they would prioritize the mental health of people. And meanwhile, like coming out the mouths of a mental health person, they're like threatening you with this email. It's just it's kind of gross.
Yeah. Well, I think I would say they're apps, they're tech apps first with providing mental health services. I don't know that I would necessarily count a lot of these apps as mental health apps, as mental health services. They connect people that do therapy with somebody else. It's like an Uber. Uber doesn't drive you places. Uber just connects you with somebody that does. And so like these are tech companies first, I think, and they operate under the same data economy, data harvesting, data profiteering that tech companies do. They just provide mental health services instead of ride sharing. And so I think it's better to think of them like that.
Yeah, I think that reminds me of when I was listening to There Are No Girls on the Internet. There was one portion where they talked about, and Bridget talked to you right here. I can just ask you, it's the Uber for mental health. Do we need apps that are the Uber for mental health? What do you think about that, Bridget?
Yeah, I mean, I so agree with how Jen put it. I think that think about how the role that Uber plays in your life, right? it's a ride that will, at a push of a button, someone will come take you where you got to go. Is this person being paid well? What's their life like? Who knows? Unclear, right? And so obviously it's filling a need, an accessibility need in all of our lives, but that doesn't mean that we should just accept it as a good thing. And I think I would really pose the question of whether or not getting access to mental health services should be and look and feel like Uber. I would argue no. I would argue that that's not an acceptable, dynamic to the relationship of getting mental health. And I wanted to also chime in on something else that Jen said that I think is so important, that a lot of these apps are able to sort of exploit this like very squishy, weird gray area of whether or not they're actually delivering health services. They kind of are in this like overall wellness space. And so, you might go into this relationship thinking, well, certainly my data is protected by a law like HIPAA. It's not, right? I think they're really exploiting a lot of public confusion around how these things work, right? And so, I want to just like call that out. And then I remember during the Travis Scott conversation, BetterHelp, when people, rightly so, had a lot of questions about like, well, how is this data going to be used? Like this and that. They put out an FAQ, and in their FAQ, they said one of the questions was, is information that members enter on BetterHelp sold to advertising platforms or third parties? And they just answered no, right, in their FAQ, just an emphatic no, period. But then when you go to their own, publicly stated privacy policy, they have a whole section called purposes for which information is used. And so clearly that answer of just no, period, can't be the full story, because that wouldn't be in their privacy policy, right? And so I believe these platforms are really exploiting vagaries and gray areas and sort of public misconceptions to really create a dynamic that I just don't think people actually want from what is purporting to be like, the app connecting them to mental health services.
It sounds like the answer actually by BetterHelp is like, no, but please don't look at our privacy policy, because
exactly. Yeah. It's not just a no.
Yeah. It's no.
And Misha and I can tell you that like the word sold for data is a very, it's a word that has meaning beyond just what we think of as sold. And so, yeah, they might not actually be selling based on, and I saw a response from BetterHelp, not to me, but to a customer that said, under the California law definition of sold, we're not selling data. It's a very legal definition. And so maybe they aren't selling your data, but the better question is, are they sharing your data? And who are they sharing it with, and for what purposes? And so, because maybe they're not technically selling it, but they could be selling it, but they could be sharing it and in exchange for, advertising and all these other personalization and things like that. And so that question of sold, and Misha can probably talk about it even more than I can, is a question of, what does the definition of sold mean?
Yeah, I do want to get Misha in here. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think a lot of times people really throw around the term selling data. But if the company sold the data, they would have nothing to bring advertisers back to them to kind of profit on in the future. If they hold on to the data that they know about you, they can continue to say, hey, come back to us for more of data about Xavier so we can, get some more money out of you. But Misha, maybe you could talk more about that. One thing I kind of have heard you all say separately, which is an important point, is, are these mental health companies or are these data advertising companies? Maybe you can talk about that, Misha, and just talk about just the idea of sold data versus sharing data versus why this is all just so stressful.
Yeah. It is stressful. It is stressful for us to understand what they share and how they share. And it starts from the point of collection. Most of these apps, when they collect data on you, they get data from third parties, and they collect data that they combine data from the apps with the data that they have from the third parties, so they have more or less nice profile on you, and then they can share this bundle further. And we see that a lot of sharing is actually happening on the app level, on the technology level. Most of the apps send device ID, advertisement ID, location, name, GPS location even sometimes to companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon, and the Rakuten, which is Japanese based, and some sometimes Chinese based advertisement networks. And this is in the app itself. This is something that we track live. We use the app and we see in the screens through the open source tools how the data is being just sent there. But in addition to it, and like the most dangerous addition is sharing, which is directly defined in the privacy policy, usually behind the words like we might share data for business purposes with our business partners or something like that. And then we don't know what it means. Like, do they just have like an Excel file that they just send per like email to I don't know whom, and no one knows whom, or do they just put data into the cloud and then they give access to some data broker in the same cloud? So like there is a lot of sharing that's going on behind the wall, and unless I think unless we have some whistleblower there who will speak up about it, we will never even know with whom and what data is being shared. And to conclude this, then when we look at the at forums in the dark web or on the Telegram, we can see some leaked data from companies like BetterHelp or Talkspace, and it's regularly like popping up there and then it disappears again. We cannot check what kind of data is there, and then it's impossible to track how it got there and what exactly is there, and is it being sold initially or not. But with all of that, like just reading and believing that we do not sell data, no, we do not, just makes no sense. It doesn't tell anything about the complications, and these complications are A, in the technology itself, and B, in the data management process that they have, how they use cloud and how they share and like with whom. But what we can say for sure, what we can track is that for the advertisement, most of the apps to be looked at shared device IDs and some basic personal information like name, email, location, sometimes GPS location.
Yeah, when you say all this, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and that is alarming by itself. Yeah, like why do they have to? Yeah, like PTSD coach by the US government organization does not collect anything and doesn't share anything, and I don't see any reason why any app have to do it, given that most of them ask for a fee anyways. Like, why do they have to share this? I don't have answers.
Yeah, it's like, if I'm paying for this app, why are you still trying to profit in this way? One thing, when you say that, one thing that comes to mind is times you've talked about in the past, how it's a little unfair that users in, say, California or Europe get kind of better protections than everyone else. And that feels kind of wrong, it feels like.
Yeah. For we can see that California users and EU residents can ask the data to be deleted, or they can look at data or even transfer data from one app to another. But in the rest of the world, or even like, let's say you are based in New York, you cannot even do that. And that's also like questionable. Why, if you provide some rights to people in some area, why you do not provide it to the whole world? And then does it mean that maybe most of the apps will go in the gray zone and say we cannot really find out if user comes from some area or not? So like by default, we do not provide these rights to the data unless a user takes an initiative to prove otherwise, that like, hello, I am based in San Francisco, please, I need access to these rights, I have like registration here. This is like something that I think we have to push companies to do by default. Just give everyone the same rights. As simple as that.
Right. Well, I think we're nearing the end of our talk here. I think before we end, I do want to get some kind of final takeaways from each of you. So maybe we can go around the table, maybe start with Bridget, about just things people should know, things people should keep in mind as they use these apps, things that you want to leave the audience with. So I'll start with Bridget.
Thank you for this conversation. It's been really enlightening. I would say just that, like, we deserve better, right? Like companies, as Jen and Misha both said, should do better. It shouldn't be, you shouldn't have to be like a JD to understand the privacy policy of an app that is trying to give you mental health, connect you with mental health services. We deserve better. I guess I'll leave it at that.
We deserve better, but we don't deserve better help. Don't give us that. Misha, what do you think? What's your final takeaway?
Do we have to push the apps urgently, at least to fix, which is easily fixable, like passwords and encryptions, reading their own emails, and like simple things. And then in the next few years, I think that will be again and again question of really calling out companies for their advertisement and privacy practices. But so far, we're not much there yet. Like the overall standard is so low that I think we'll need a few years to even to get into the minds of people that privacy is important.
We're definitely not there yet. If you're logging in with a single number 1 and hitting enter, you're in. We're not there yet at all. All right, Jen, what is your final takeaway, and what do you want to leave people with?
I want to mention one company that we found that there was a for-profit company of the ones that we gave a best of, and we found were good. There was one for-profit company that did really well, and that was Wiza, and they make an AI chatbot. And they actually really, and it's unfortunate that Becky couldn't be here. Becky, who works at Wiza and helped set up their policies, was supposed to be here, but was unable to make it. And it's unfortunate because they really looked at like what's ethical and how, and they thought through, like they didn't just write a boilerplate privacy policy, really thought through, they seem to at least think through what statements they make and then how they're going to back them up in their privacy policy. And it really stood out to Misha and I. And so I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that there is a company out there that can kind of serve as a model for what's doing better, and the questions that I would love to have, I recognize when you're looking for mental health help, you might have the brain space to think all this through. But if you do, ask the questions like, what does consent look like? When they'll say very clearly in a privacy policy, hey, we'll never share or sell your data without your consent. Okay, well, what does consent look like? Is it just registering and using the app when I click accept? Does that mean that, oh, now you've got permission to share and sell my data? Giving everybody the same rights, as Misha said, it's like everybody that should have the same rights to access and delete their data, not just people that live under GDPR in Europe or in California. Stating very clearly in a privacy policy, we do not and will never sell your data. That's something that Misha and I really looked for and we didn't find in a lot of cases. And it was very confusing about, and then we'd say, well, we can't tell. And they're like, oh, we don't do it. And I was like, well, why don't you say that in your privacy policy? He was like, oh, well, it's complicated. And I was like, it's not complicated. If you're not selling data, say that in your privacy policy, make it very clear. And so there's just some things that I know that I hate to put the responsibility on consumers to protect themselves because it should absolutely not be their responsibility. But unfortunately, the companies aren't doing what they should be doing, and the regulators that regulate the companies aren't doing what they should be doing. And both of those should those are the ones that are the bad guys in this scenario, not the consumers that are just seeking help and have been recommended this or been offered an app through their workplace that they said can help. And then they go into this and they don't realize that by signing up for it, they're giving away some rights to their data. Some of their personal information is being shared. Is it being shared with their employer? It's hard to tell, what's being shared. And so I just want to impress upon people that if you have the mental space to kind of take a quick look at a privacy policy, do. It's not fun. Misha and I do it for a living, and it's dry and boring. And Misha had a great line when we were doing this. It's like we try and take what they intentionally make gray in their privacy policies and make it black and white for users. It's really hard to do. But I just want to say, hold companies accountable. If you're using one of these apps and you read our review and it's not good, send them a response and to their customer service. And if they send you some kind of BS response back, keep pushing them, because nothing's going to change unless the dollars go away, because that's what it's about right now. And it shouldn't be like this. It absolutely shouldn't be like this. And thank you to companies like Wiza and the nonprofits like the Sesame Street app, and the PTSD coach made by the U.S. government. There are some good ones out there, but they're few and far between, and we need all companies to do better right now.
Who knew Sesame Street was such like a privacy guardian? I didn't think I realized that. That's great.
Well, they're doing their best. The problems with the nonprofits is they don't have the same level of resources to kind of keep up with things. But their privacy policies are like, we don't need your data. We're not trying to collect your data, which is good. And we appreciate that.
If you're making an app, just think WWSD, what would Sesame Street do? Sesame SSD. Anyway, this is the end of our show. Thank you for everybody for tuning in. You can follow us at Mozilla on Twitter for more panels like this, for more social media from us. Special thanks to Zaina, Audrey, Kevin, Andy, Mark, Ali for all their help. Special thanks to the panelists, Bridget, Misha, Jen. I'm the host and producer of today's discussion. Until next time, see you later. Bye, everybody.